The new normal is that every day is a day to make just a little bit more improvement in my condition.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 67 of the Strokecast. This week, Strokecast guest blogger Peter Evans and his wife Ria return to the podcast. We first heard from them back in episode 60, where we talked about the details of Peter's stroke and how it changed their lives. This time, we have less of an interview, and really it's more of a conversation. We dive deeper into the emotional challenges of life after stroke as we explore goal setting, depression, meditation, and the importance of breaking out of negative patterns. We talk about some of the techniques we use to manage our moods and take control of our mindset. So now, let's talk with Peter and Ria Evans. We talked about your list of power thoughts.
Yes, I got that from Ria. I got to give her credit.
Awesome, because that's one of those aspects of it that I really like, the idea of talking about lists. And what jumped out to me about that was the idea of just the importance of making a list. I tend to think of things in the Harry Potter universe and think of lists as the idea of like a pensive, the idea where and that's where I think some of their real power is. It lets you think about other things by clearing out the stuff that goes on your to-do list, and then the act of making a list of the important things to remind yourself of has its own power.
It really does. It really does. As I was writing that, I sounded like I was sort of an expert on it. And some of it was almost like my higher self was writing it for me. It's like, remember these things. But one of the things that I really do a lot of is it's at night. If I'm sort of, my brain starts to, maybe go down into a negative ditch or something, I remind myself. And I actually, like I said, I have to give that credit to Ria because she's done a lot of work on her own for that thing. And I've appropriated a lot of it.
I think too, Bill, for me with making of the list, just I think kind of like what you were saying is the making of the list can be so helpful in that for me, it brings other inspirations. And another thing is sometimes it takes my mind off of something that I might obsess about. So say maybe it's a small thing or it's something that, we all have those little nigglings in life like, oh my God, is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? Is it going to? And then if I put it on the list, I can then say, okay, it's there. It's going to be there.
You've done something about it.
Yeah. And it frees up my mind to let the whatever else is out there take care of it or help. Yep.
Exactly. Putting it in its place, clearing it out, and letting you do other things, and breaking the loop and breaking the pattern that it's currently driving in.
Yeah, that's it. When it starts spinning and spinning and spinning, I've found that this actually does help to break that cycle. And to Ria's point, she's often said before, she's like, now that I've put it on the paper, I can tell myself I have done something, and you can now stop thinking about it.
Even if it's just to take a few minutes off from it, I think it's even just to get that relief, because we can all be obsessive on thoughts. You know what else works for me too? I don't care how this sounds, but I like to talk to myself out loud at times, and then I answer myself. I find it to be sometimes when I'm really stuck on something to have a little conversation. Do you ever do that?
That I don't do that in particular, but that does make a lot of sense to me. And it makes a lot more sense to me now than it did a few years ago, now that I've been, learning more and more about the brain, in that the idea that when you've got something cycling around in your head and just spinning around in your head, it's living in one part of your brain.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we, you start to learn when you start learning about things like aphasia is that language and words are different from thought. And then the expression of those words is different from the words themselves. So when you've got something that's just spiraling around in your brain, it's operating in one part of your brain. But once you start talking to yourself, now you've had to move it further elsewhere in the brain. You've had to move it through the language processing center. You've had to move it then through the parts of the brain that control speech to get it out there, and then cycles back into the brain, not just through your thought process, but through now your auditory processing. So it has to run through all of that, and all of those different parts of the brain then can apply their own metric to it, and your brain then gets to analyze it from the outside as well.
Oh, I just love that. So it's not stuck in the language center. It's sort of going through all parts of the brain. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And it seems to be just by virtue of it's, going into different places as you're talking, I can imagine it actually is helpful for, say, if someone is struck with aphasia, that by stimulating other parts of the brain while you're going through this, you're perhaps creating new pathways for language to work, bypassing some areas that might have had some damage.
Yeah, that's very true. And that's when I talk with folks who've had aphasia or who have aphasia, what's super frustrating is that all of those thoughts, all of their intellect, everything they want to say is still there.
Yes.
And it's still running and it's still cycling, and they just can't get it out because that language part of the brain is what's damaged.
Right. Yeah.
Another one of those things that's really interesting is that my girlfriend's father, when he had a stroke, he had been an immigrant. He was an immigrant.
Yeah.
When he had his stroke, he lost his English.
Oh.
All of his English went away for about 3 or 4 weeks.
But his first language remained?
His first language remained perfectly intact. And so he was speaking a specific dialect of Cantonese that only his wife could speak. Because their other daughter, she could speak Cantonese and could usually translate for them, but she couldn't because he went back not just beyond English, but beyond standard Cantonese back to his original Cantonese.
His dialect.
So he had to speak Cantonese to his wife, who would then translate from Cantonese to their daughter, who could then translate into English.
Oh, my goodness. And it took him 3 to 4 weeks then to get the language back. Was it just all at once, or was it a process?
It was all at once.
Wow. Doesn't that blow your mind?
It really does. It's really amazing. When you think about that, one of the things that one of the experiences I had before my stroke was I had studied Spanish in high school and college. And then about 10 years ago, I went to Japan for a week. And while I was in Japan, as I was trying to talk with folks and communicate with folks, parts of, Spanish words kept coming to the front of my brain. It's like my brain knew English and not English.
Oh,
and
that's so
the language didn't distinguish between them clearly. But
I can absolutely identify. I used to live in France, and when I was first starting out, if a word eluded me, it sort of went through boom, 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 Italian, Spanish, then English, and as if they were all in different sections of my mind.
Exactly. The thing is, a lot of times, all of the words, everything we want to, all the words we want are there. It's just that the index for all of that has been wiped out, and we have to rebuild the index. And I think that's what happened to my girlfriend's father. He had to rebuild that index.
How fascinating.
Fascinating. Do you have a to-do list things that your power list?
I don't have one of those specifically. I go back to a few different themes that I try to live my life by. The idea of the power of yet. I don't know if we talked about this.
That is just great. Absolutely.
Well,
and Ria says she takes it from the other side, the exact same idea. She goes, I'm in the process of.
Yeah, the process of, then there's less pressure.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, what is the power of yet? Similar.
Yet is the most important, most powerful word in the English language, because especially when it comes to retraining my brain and encouraging that neuroplasticity, and trying to balance against things like learned non-use, is that there's a very different thing. It's very different to say, I can't use my left hand versus to say, I can't use my left hand yet.
Exactly.
It's sort of about recognizing the reality of today, but making plans to make it different tomorrow.
And keeping an open mind. So it is pretty much what I say, except I would say I'm in the process, so that it keeps that there's hope, that there's faith, that it can happen, rather than I can't use it.
Yeah. May not be yet, but you're in the process.
Yeah. And we're such a red brain society. What's my guy's name that I like with this book? Hardwiring Happiness
by Rick Hansen.
Yeah.
Have you heard it? I think you'd love it.
I haven't encountered that one.
Yeah, it's a great one. And so basically the bottom line is we are, there's red brain and green brain, and we're based from when we were, from the beginning was like, run, do this, do that. And everything's on that.
Often referred to as negative bias. Yeah.
Negative bias. And when we go to the positive bias, it takes more work.
Well, one of the things that's really interesting too is, have you read Dr. Taylor's book, My Stroke of Insight?
No, but someone was mentioning it in our group, and I wrote it down, but I never got it.
Yeah, it's she was a neuroscientist who had a stroke. She had an AVM rupture on the left side of her brain.
Oh boy!
And over the course of this happening, she chronicles the actual stroke while it's happening over the course of like 40 or 50 pages of what her experience is like and what's happening in those few hours. But what's really interesting about it is that how much of it, basically, it knocked the left side of her brain out almost completely for months. And she talks about having to live in the right brain for a scientist who's always been bound by logic to open up to this other world of time having less meaning and sort of this deeper intuitive connection and stuff. And I mean, from my experience with the book, I didn't connect with it as much from that perspective because it felt a little woo-woo, one with the universe from my experience. But then at the same time, may in part be because her stroke was on the left side of her brain. My stroke was on the right side of my brain. So so essentially, while mine wasn't as massive, it probably also did shift me more back towards the logical side and flattened out my affect in a little bit in some ways.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. I remember mine's on the right side as well. And I was doing a lot of cognitive stuff when I first came back from acute rehab. And I was surprised that I actually was better at some of that logic stuff still than I would have been. I don't know. It's just a big journey. The bottom line is basically that sort of by objectively observing what's happening in my stroke and in my recovery and what is now different from how I perceive of something than I did before, that to me, it keeps me fascinated and keeps me from becoming just too hopeless and depressed that, oh my gosh, it's all such a jumble in there. You can actually, I guess that's what meditation is, isn't it? That's observing your own mind. But just sort of through self-observation, I've come to know myself a little bit better than before my stroke.
Well, we often hear that in our groups too, that people talk about, I'm a different person now than I was. And they talk objectively about, here's how I was before, here's how I am after. And I, as a caretaker, one thing I have to say is going through the traumatic experience of watching a loved one, especially when it's as sudden as ours was and is devastating, it takes time. And as time goes on, I remember waking up this one morning and saying, oh, it's dawning on me what one of the wonderful women said to me. She was one of our helpers, our caseworkers. She said, Ria, this is a life-changing event. And that's when Peter was still in the coma. And I didn't really understand it until probably about 8 months into it. And I was like, oh, and it means your whole life. You really are, it's like a whole different life. You're still the same person, but the people do change. And everyone in our groups, they always talk about how they're different people now.
Yeah.
It really is, in many respects, a rebirth. I'm thinking about this as we come up on next month. June 3rd is my stroke anniversary.
Oh.
And a lot of people describe their stroke, the anniversary of their stroke, really as their second birthday.
Oh, gosh, I can identify with that totally. When a year had rolled around for me, I was like, oh my gosh, what a different world, what a different person I am already. I mean, 1 year from there, it's just crazy. That was a big changing event. And I think about it a lot as a stroke anniversary, as an anniversary, exactly. And I'm kind of using it as a bit of one of those rings in the tree to say, this is when I went from being A to B.
Well, I like to take it a little further with Peter, and I said on his, I like stroke anniversary, so we're going to borrow that if you don't mind. But what I did was say, we're celebrating a miracle, because he truly is a miracle. And I think that's something that we have to continue to remember, because as time goes by, things get a little, life goes on and you can forget. So constantly that gratitude.
It becomes ordinary.
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you make banal something that was really big and important.
Yes.
And I think that's one of those things, too, where the brain has a tremendous ability to normalize things and to just accept things that are normal. And that's one of those things where, especially as we get further out, and I mentioned the idea of learned non-use a moment ago.
Oh, sure.
For folks who aren't familiar with that, learned non-use is where when you don't use the affected limb, your brain just sort of stops even trying. It stops trying to grow it. It just redirects those brain resources to other things. So it becomes harder and harder to get back to using it. And as you adapt, and one of the things I'm fighting now is that as I adapt to doing so many things with one hand and letting my left arm off the hook, if I go too far with that, I'm never going to get it back.
Oh, God.
The brain just says, yeah, that's just normal. This is what life is. It's not that big a deal. But you have to force it.
I had my stroke impacted my visual field. So I have this cut. So the whole left side of my field is gone. And it's not like I'm trying to, hold out some false hope for myself, but I constantly, if I have like a free second, I put out my right hand a little bit to the right and my left hand a little bit to the left. And I try and bring them in to see where I can see the hand start to come in as it's in front of my face. And I think to myself, one of these days I'm going to be able to see over there. So I tell my left eye, I'm like, it's not in the eye, it's in the brain, obviously. But I'm like, you can see it, follow it. I've made it into a little game. So maybe I'm like, don't get used to not being able to see out of the left side, try and make it come back.
Yeah, just keeping up like that hope. Well, it would be a yet. Not using that arm yet, right?
Yeah,
for you, that
exactly. The other theme I go back to a lot these days is, the way I sign off each of these episodes, which is don't get best, get better.
Oh, I love that.
All you have to do is just try to improve just a little bit every day.
Yeah.
That continuous growth, and whether you're talking about it in stroke recovery, in public speaking, in any other skill in life that you want to acquire, you don't have to be the best, because in order for you to be the best, that means everybody else has to be worse. And that's not a way of building a team, and that's not a way of helping folks. Just get a little bit better every day.
I love that.
You know how I use that, actually? I was just thinking as he was speaking. I've written a lot about this, how my emotions they've just gotten the better of me. Things become exaggerated. I can lose my temper over nothing or just start crying for no reason. And what really made the difference was when I actually realized I feel the temperature go up. Like, my wife likes to use that analogy of that thing where you take a very heavy hammer at the fair and you pound that thing and the metal weight goes all the way up to ring the bell. She goes, that's what your temper and your emotions are like. And whenever I feel that it's starting to come and that I stepped back and I said, no, I'm not going there, I actually talk about it. I'm like, you know what? We just avoided some big fight because I didn't go there. So it seems small, but it's really a big deal. That a disagreement, or just even me, say, losing my temper or maybe crying about something. And when I can avoid it, it's like, you know what? I'm going to celebrate that. That was really great. You know, I didn't lose my temper, or I didn't go into a deep blue funk when I had that thing happen. So I added up and I had these little tick marks on it, like the guy in prison who has those little lines that the day until he gets out.
Right. Well, you know, and recognizing that and reinforcing that, hey, I didn't do that. That was awesome. That little celebration for yourself reinforces for your brain that, oh, this is a good thing. This is the kind of behavior we want to see more of.
Yes.
And, you know, Bill, I was saying at one of our meetings the other day is that we live in a world where, you know, we touch, we see, we smell, you write your list down, you say them out loud. And the way we talk to ourselves, there's nothing, unless we're putting it down, that's there. There's no proof, like when you go to the gym and you lift the weights, hey, here's my muscle. It's something that, and I was saying it to someone in the group, you really have to actively work at it the same way you would. She said, every day I wake up, I say to myself, this is a terrible day.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, well, you have to find, as you would say, a better way around that, or just a step. And yeah, it sucks and nobody wants to do it. And it's just easier to say, oh, it's a bad day. Oh, look at the world. It sucks and all that. That's just easier to do. But I told her, remember, you can't measure, like I can't say, oh, I'm going to listen to the podcast, or, oh, here's something in writing. It's something that really takes, it's almost invisible work. But the rewards are tremendous because thoughts are things and they vibrate energy. You know, they just do.
Yeah, so take care in which ones you choose.
Yeah. And
think.
Even if you don't believe it, you could say, like you would say, I'm not believing this yet, but I'm in the process of feeling better.
The brain is going to give you whatever it is you focus on. If you tell yourself that, you know, it's the old Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right.
Yep. Ria recites that to me very often. Yeah. I'm saying it once every 2 months, at least, that's been uttered someplace in this house.
I love him. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're right. Yeah. So simple.
Exactly. Back when I was living in Montana in the 90s, I was bored one weekend. So I took because, you know, that'll happen. So I took a motorcycle course to figure out how to learn to get my motorcycle license. I have never ridden a motorcycle since then, but I took the class and passed it. So any medical providers who are listening, you know, keep your eyes off of my kidneys. I'm keeping them. One of the things they taught us was that when there's a pothole or debris or a pedestrian or something else in the road in front of you, don't look at it. What you have to do is you have to look at the path around that obstacle to where you're going. Because if you look at the obstacle, if you look at that object, your brain will drag you to it. Your brain will drag you to whatever it is you are focused on. And if you focus on that object, you will hit it. And if you focus on what a crappy day it's going to be, you know what? Your brain is going to take you to that crappy day. If you focus on the things that prevent you from doing the things you want to do, your brain is going to drag you into those. Instead, focus on the path around them. Focus on the path to success and stay focused on your ultimate goal.
Oh, gosh.
I love that.
Absolutely. Your example with the motorcycle reminds me of one where I hear it in my head all the time. I had this art teacher. We had to take art class, you know, in junior high or something. And I was trying to cut a straight line with a pair of scissors. And he goes, you're looking where you've already cut. He goes, look to where you want to cut and then it'll be straight. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Now I can draw a straight line and I can cut a straight line. It's like, don't look where you've been, look where you're going.
And you could see the same thing too, even if you're just trying to draw a straight line.
Yeah.
If you're trying, if you're listening now and are able to get just a pen and paper, just try it. Just try to draw a straight line and look very closely at the tip of that pen and the line you've been drawing and try to continue to draw and see how straight it is versus start drawing that line freehand and then look towards where that line is going to end and look how straight your line is at the end of that.
Yes, you'll see. Anyone who tries that experiment will see, absolutely. If you're looking either at the tip of your pencil or the line that you've laid down on the page, you're never going to draw a straight line. But if you look where you want to end up, you don't even have to think about it. Your hand just automatically goes there.
And if you've gone ahead and done that, go ahead and email a picture of those lines to strokecast.com and we'll get them posted on the website.
Yeah.
That's great. That is so great.
So I think a lot of that, that then all becomes important because we talk about it in the big picture, and that ties directly into your emotional state. When you focus on the emotions, you're going to, you focus on the negative emotions and the power of them. You really are empowering those.
Oh, it's so true. It can just sabotage you so badly. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the brain just abhors a vacuum. It can't stand it if you're not thinking about something. So you better fill it with something that's going to be working for you rather than something that drives you into a ditch.
I want to go back to the talking to yourself. So here's a little tip for people that, can talk and everything. If you would like to, I found this very helpful. When I'm driving, I can talk to myself out loud in the car and nobody thinks I'm crazy. Because remember back in the days when they didn't have cell phones, people would be like, are you talking to yourself? And then that way you get that auditory thing going. Number 2, maybe hug your pillow. Yep. That can be comforting. You have anything to add, honey?
No.
Just some tips.
I like the hugging the pillow. I think I'm going to
hugging the pillow. I should end with the third. What about you, Bill? Any thoughts? Any tips?
I think when it comes to what I find is that a lot of times thinking about when I get myself into a cycle and start getting down and things like that, sometimes it's just I gotta take my mind off of that and I gotta focus on I'm doing this to get through. Through to this next thing. This is not going to last.
Oh, I love that.
I don't know who said it, but no feeling is ever permanent. That really struck a bell with me. Just realize that if you're feeling bad right now, it will pass.
Exactly. Get your mind past the moment and look at what the way it's going to be coming. As Billy Joel says in one of his big songs is the good old days weren't always so good, and tomorrow's not as bad as it seems.
Oh, yeah, I love him. Yeah, that's really great. That is great.
A modern day poet.
So when we think about that, and the brain is always having these directions, you mentioned meditation earlier.
Oh, yeah. Meditation, I've dabbled with meditation for the past 25 years. But sometimes it's hard to keep the discipline of it. And there's just so much, expectation that you put around it when you think like, now I'm getting up, I'm going to do my 15 minutes of meditation. And yes, of course, regularity is very helpful for it. But sometimes, and I do this a lot, and I know that others do, is that you make such a big deal out of it that it becomes that, if it isn't setting the world on fire, it's not worth it. And it's just not true. So I remember doing a lot of reading on mindfulness meditation. And so even if I don't follow somebody's specific way to do it, I use it now, actually. I go, okay, just start observing my own mind. What am I thinking about right now? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? And by making it by putting it in objective terms, it takes away a lot of that power to make it feel like it's me. It's I'm getting sucked in. No, it's just my thoughts are going in the wrong direction. So let's put my mind on something else. And it's not such a big deal. I use meditation every day. I sit there cross-legged and stuff, but I don't always have to make it into such a big deal. So now sometimes I'll sort of calm myself, in the middle of a waiting room or something, and I go, wow, that really worked. Made me feel so much better. It didn't have to be with the incense and the bells. Just by calming down for a second and not identifying so closely with all those thoughts makes it a lot easier for me to step away from them.
You know what I want to add to that too, Bill, is that while I was listening to Peter, it was so inspirational. What I always try to remember is there's no one size fits all. Now, for me, meditation, okay, I can sit for about a minute, but and maybe for somebody else talking to themselves out loud, but some people might go, oh, and other people say, oh. And when we talk about the one size fits all, well, how will you know? Well, the great thing, here's number one, about this universe that we live in right now is that we have so much wonderful information available to us on the web.
So much technology.
Oh my God, I just am so grateful every day for that. I mean, I remember a time when you'd have to go to the library and look things up. I think you probably remember that too, right? There just wasn't this great wealth. So
sure.
You know what I mean? It's like, oh, and go to the index cards and, sit and actually go there, oh, I want to find out more about this. Oh, do I have time to go to the library, find the parking spot? So, and with every person, it's going to be individual. There is no one size fits all, but you will find something that fits.
If you keep
but how will you know? By how you feel. Like I can say to Peter, you must do meditation. And he's like, okay, try. Well, you can keep trying to put the round circle in the blue hole or whatever that saying is, the square peg in the round hole, but it's not going to make it work. But now we have so much available to us. Find what fits for you and you'll know how it fits by how you feel. Does it make me feel good or does it make me feel bad?
You're
right.
A person.
Right. I think the other thing that's really interesting there too is that meditation as a word also comes with a lot of cultural baggage.
Yes.
Exactly. And when you talk about whether it's a coping technique, whether it's a cognitive behavioral therapy thing to address negative thoughts, whether it is a motivational quotes or repeating your affirmations, whether it is a mindfulness practice, a lot of it's the same thing. It's about breaking the cycles that our brain is going through so that we can understand what's happening and then adjust to what is actually happening versus what our brain is distracting us with.
You're so right.
It's
just raising the awareness of it. It takes sometimes a little bit of a jolt or somebody to point it out when I'm in a negative thought pattern here. Why don't I just stop that?
Well, gee,
or I'm not seeing clearly. I'm clearly spinning out of control here.
Well, you know what I like about what you just said, Bill, is you opened it up so that makes the meditation and the mindfulness, it feels better. Because I think a lot of times when I sat down to it, it's like, oh, more suffering. I got to sit here. I got to cross my legs. I'm not really feeling much better. Suffer some more. Because isn't that what we're supposed to do? So, but the way you framed it, it's like, oh, it's a sense of relief. It's like, oh, that feels better.
Yeah.
Exactly. And one of the things about it too is that sometimes also means that if you can develop a practice like that, it also becomes something where you may be able to occupy your hands with something else while you do that. There are things which can almost be meditative practices for some people, whether that's going to be, everything from sorting buttons to doing the dishes to, some of these things which can get kind of mindless that free up parts of your brain to think about other things. And even you can apply that to aspects of your physical or occupational therapy.
Absolutely. When I first came back from the rehab hospital, I had a bunch of iPad exercises and games, and I did exactly what you said. I said, instead of mindlessly zoning out, I sort of said, keep myself very engaged in this task of moving these things around the screen or whatever the task happened to be, it turned it more into this sort of really peace-inducing meditation exercise. People can meditate while they're doing the dishes. And there's lots of opportunity around to sort of, I don't know, check in with your brain and your mind. How are you doing? What's going on?
I like what you're saying, Bill, and I especially like about doing the little things, because I do that, and I've done that for years. I call it, quote, my little Zen zone. Like if I'm washing the dishes, I'm really there, and then I just am sort of in the flow, and it's so much fun, and it's creative, because what I do sometimes is, say, for example, something's really heavy on my mind or I'm very upset with it. If I'm washing the dish, I'll kind of visualize washing it away. Oh, I'm cleaning this. Oh, this feels good. So things like that, you can have some fun and creativity with that activity, and you're not, for my personality, sitting on a pillow.
Yeah, not making it a drudge.
But everybody's different. Some people prefer to have that nice, comfortable spot, and so on.
Right. I think the word you use there that's really interesting is creative, and letting it and turning those activities, like aspects of doing the dishes, into a creative endeavor.
Totally.
And yeah, because I think every little bit counts. I take kind of borrowing that from you, and it's like, okay, I have an opportunity here. And even, for example, say I'm really angry about something. Well, I can scrub that pot or that pan, or if I vacuum, or even if I'm walking our little Yorkie. He's very bossy. Strong old Yorkie. And, it always seems like when I'm in the baddest mood, he's going to be a little brat. but I take that opportunity. So even if it's vacuuming, and I go, "Arr," and I creatively saying, okay, I can release this anger. I can release this, put it into something. And then guess what? The floor is clean. The dishes are done. And, I'm feeling better. So...
you just mean...
So, Peter, how often do you come back to the house and see the carpet looking exceptionally clean, and your first one is, uh-oh?
Actually, it's pretty often. I'll see, she'll say, I want you to look here in this room. She'll lead me to another room and feel the feeling. And I'm like, yes, I totally feel it. You've been doing some power cleaning around here, haven't you? She goes, can't you just feel it spiritually, how much better this room is? Yes, absolutely, honey.
Well, it's true, and if you put intention there, like let's go back to some of those things from the Hitler days. They had that music that went, bah, bah, and even if we listen to certain kinds of music, they evoke a feeling. And when you have things around you, I've often walked in a room and I've gone, whoa, what's happened here? Maybe somebody's just had an argument, or there's just some energy. And I believe that, when you're putting intention into what you're doing, even the smallest things, it shows up. We can't see it, though.
Yeah.
It can't talk to us. We can't Google it.
I like the idea of, being creative. And it made me think of something you told me a long time ago, that whether you think you're being creative or not, you're creating your experience and your reality at every moment. So it really, it makes more sense to be creating something that's positive, uplifting, happy, good for people, good for yourself. Do you remember when you told me that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's like if you don't think you're creative, it doesn't matter. You are creative because you create your reality at every moment.
Yeah, and the only person, if you go, well, I'm not creative, you're just arguing with who? Yourself. Like, how stupid is that? It's like, okay. So if you're going to talk to yourself, talk nice.
One of the things, when we start talking about things like, the way you talk to yourself, is that most of us would never tolerate somebody else talking to us or about us the way we talk about ourselves to ourselves.
Oh, I think about that all the time. And whenever I catch wind of me being very mean to myself, it reminds me how somebody said, treat yourself as if you were somebody you loved. And I'm like, it really hit me. I'm like, wow, if I want to love myself, it's not going to be talking like that.
Mm-hmm. Hug the pillow.
The pillow. Exactly. Well, I think one of the other important things here is we're talking about, ways to break out of these cycles and to modify our own behavior and our own thought patterns and our own emotional states. What's important to realize too is that many people want to do that and are not able to do that. Depression and clinical depression is a serious side effect of stroke for many people. And I'm not talking about the crying that results from emotional lability. That's something else altogether. But the depression that lies to you, the depression that, prevents you from getting up and doing things, from getting out of bed. And, there are medical systems to treat that, whether that's going to be counseling, whether that's going to be through medication. I've seen, you see some of the memes on the internet that, hey, if you can't make your own neurotransmitters, that's fine. Store-bought is fine. And if you find yourself unable to deal with these things, or you're the partner to somebody who's unable to deal with these things, whether that person's a stroke survivor, a caregiver, or what have you, sometimes you got to reach out and you got to find the help and you got to get this taken care of, because depression is just as much a serious medical condition as having a stroke or having a flu or having anything else go wrong in your body or your brain.
It's so true. It's such a shame. I can tell, even when we talk in our group, some people will be talking and someone will sort of offer as a suggestion, there are antidepressants. You can talk to your doctor about that. But the stigma around it is really unfortunate, because there's so much great medicine out there that can really, really help. It's your brain. Your brain is damaged. Your brain is what manages your emotions. And I am not ashamed of the medicines that I now take. In fact, my wife says it's sort of saved our marriage, because I had both. I had emotional lability and depression. And I'm a bit of a crank, because I'm like, I don't want to be taking, say, statins or blood pressure pills or whatever. And I don't like taking a pill every day. But there are times when we notice, like, oh my God, something's going on. And she can tell. She'll be looking at me. She'll like, you forgot to take your pills this morning, didn't you? And I'm like, oh God. And it kind of makes me feel ashamed and embarrassed. I'm like, why do I need this pill to not be such a basket case? I've made peace with it now. It's medicine and it helps. And even if it's not just for me, it helps my wife. It is so hard to be around depressed people. When I'm depressed, I suck the energy out of the room. And so now I don't take my pills for me. I take it for my wife and for my marriage. It really needs that help.
Another thing too, Bill, is that to be of any help to people or in a marriage or caregivers, and is that to sort of talk to the brain. The stigma of shame around depression has been with our society. It's sort of underlying. Yeah. And then there are people just looking at it as a helpful friend to the brain, not as something to be ashamed of. It's a helpful friend. And it, like Peter says, it really has helped tremendously, because that's another thing too that comes unexpectedly. It's like we didn't know, because ours was so traumatic. Like, okay, I go back to, is he going to live or die? Is he going to spend the rest of his life in the coma? Then he didn't. Then we went to the hospital. Then he still had a month. What day is it? What's my name? Where do I live? Who's the president? And then little by little, but then this other effect started happening, and we didn't know, because when you're on this journey, you're taking it one day at a time, because every recovery is individual. And then these emotions started, and I am telling you, it would go from 0 to 100, like over nothing. And this could be something dangerous, like leaping out of the car while it's still moving, at a slow speed, but like, oh my God, and he's a big guy and I've got to run after him, and there's cars behind us and stuff. When things like that happen, he didn't expect it. I didn't expect it. and then the thing calms down. But these things do happen after a stroke. And then there could be the extreme depression too, so I'm thinking we didn't really know what to do. So we asked our primary, and then we asked another.
Our neurologist.
And then we finally, thank God, found something. And it was actually through one of our meetings that really helps, because it's not that it's anything that Peter is putting his whole heart into it, and he is a miracle. It's just the part that's kind of in the process of getting fixed, or whatever you would say. But you have to be able to make a nice path for the brain to kind of smooth its way through what it's going through, and for the loved ones around you as well. So we're in alignment with what you're saying.
And that's the other thing. Normally we rely on our brain to make decisions and to do what's right for us. And, as, you explore more of this and learn more about the brain, you realize, just how terrible an idea that can be at times. But when you've got when you're trying to navigate the world of depression or mania or any of these other things that folks have to deal with and live with, the very part of your body that it's supposed to make the right decision is getting the bad data. It's being lied to. And, and that makes it so much harder.
It really does. It really does. So it's such a big mental change for me that I need to be much more in a kind of a cooperative, kind of collaborative mode right now, because there are parts of my brain that do not function as they used to. So I've gotten past the sadness of it and the shame of it. And I now realize that I'm going to have to rely on others more, and that others 99.9% of the time is my wife. And so I have taken away that sort of anger and shame at like, well, I used to do all this. This was my job. I used to be the one who could sort of think our way out of this. But you know what? Now I have to ask for help and accept it and realize that, I guess, like as I said, if I don't take care of it, and I do have trouble doing it by myself, she suffers just as much, if not more, than me. So it's hard. It's like trying to fix a flat tire by driving on your car that's got a flat to go pick up the tire. It's hard.
Right. That's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah. Also with what Peter and I have been able to do is, and I hope that this might be of some help to other caregivers, is like, I would say something like, just something as small as, no, that glass was over there. And no, it wasn't. That need that he has to just argue. And I have constantly had to say to him, there's nothing in this for me to start an argument. Can we move on? And it's something that's so obvious and simple, but I think if someone can actually hear that I'm on your side, we're in this together. There's nothing for me to gain by starting an argument or by telling you or playing tricks on you or whatever the brain does that gets into that sort of, here we go to the, when you slam that thing to the 100, because it could easily, fly up to that. So I don't know if that's of any help, but just if, the stroke survivor could understand that we're all in it together, and that was a bit of a challenge. I don't know, for us, is the fact of, well, prior to, the need to be right, and it goes through, but I'm like, we're not arguing.
So that point about always needing to be right is more than just sort of being pig-headed. There's also a very sad part about that for me, which is, I remember I told this to our GP. I said, it's awful. I'm wrong about absolutely everything. I go, can you imagine what that's like? It's like, I think it's A, and it's like, it's never A, it's always B, or I perceived it as being something else. And I'm like, God, I hate this. I can't trust my own cognition the way I used to be able to. Why am I always wrong? It's a very hard thing to go through, but now that I've come to peace with, as you sort of, I think I took this from you, Bill, which is I've outsourced my executive function.
He stole your line, Bill. He uses it all the time.
I am looking at life in a much more collaborative approach as opposed to a competitive one.
And, Bill, I just want to add to that is even prior to stroke, Peter had a somewhat competitive approach, and what I think is a beautiful part about this is it wasn't the first time that he thought he was wrong, and self-criticism was always an issue. But now it's really come blown up big time. What I did mention to another caregiver was that she was in the early stages, and I'm a little past a year. And she's like, I just don't know. I said, you have to face it because it's going to come to get you. Caregivers do have post-traumatic shock syndrome. Like it could be that, you're looking down, you're picking up a towel, all of a sudden you see the blood, or like things come back to you, you remember something. So you really do have to deal with it in the kindest, most loving possible way, for the highest good of all concerned, but really to take care of yourself because you're just so go. And there's just so many things from all different parts of your life. All of life. Stroke affects your whole life, not only the person, the caregiver, the home, the finances, the people around you, the way everything that you do is affected by it.
And that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of the whole initial experience, especially, it was, I think, a lot harder on my girlfriend than it was on me. Her experience those first few days in the hospital was a lot rougher than mine, I think. Because she was dealing with the stress of what's happening and having to worry about me. And I didn't have to worry. It wasn't my job to worry about her at that point. And my brain was still busy in its own cycle and its own, okay, what do we do in the next couple of minutes without really having time to go back and be worried about the future or what's happening in a way. I think it was a lot harder on her.
Well, I think for me with Peter, it was since he was unconscious, it wasn't even open, for discussion, and I was navigating a path, which
he got to almost sleep through the whole thing.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's so funny. He's like, lazy son. Yeah. So then you kind of go on that. Going forward, you're not really processing your feelings. It's just like, okay, and it's true. Someone's life is depending on it, it's your soulmate, the one you love. In my case, so there really wasn't time, to say, "Oh, I feel really bad. What am I going to do?"
And it's those emotions and those cycles that we go through in the initial trauma, in the days that follow it, and in readjusting to the new normal, to these new lives that we live now, these new lives that we're all living now. As we go through these rebirths and these cycles and this learning to understand our brains and our minds and how everything is coming together as we really go ahead and build these new lives. And it's all about the things we're doing here. It's about sharing tools and techniques and things that you can do to ultimately make your life a little bit better.
Yes.
I totally agree. And that we can help others too along the way.
You had mentioned something about the new normal, and I used to bristle at that so much. I was like, this is not the new normal. I'm going to get better. And I was just so contrarian in it. I didn't like it. And then I came to realize, the new normal is getting better every day, little bit by little bit. And I'm like, yes, that is a great new normal for me. So the new normal is that every day is a day to make just a little bit more improvement in my condition.
All right. Well, Peter and Ria, this has been fantastic. I had no idea our discussion was going to go so deep in so many different emotional aspects, and I'm really thrilled at the different things we've been able to explore, and I think we've been able to share a lot of things that are going to be be helpful to folks who are listening.
Oh, thank you, Bill. We really think your podcasts
You're fantastic.
are wonderful.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're
it's
just
a great resource. And if anyone hears this who isn't a stroke survivor and they know someone, just recommend it. I mean, it's just so helpful to know that you're not alone and to know that what you're feeling has been felt by a lot of other people. Sometimes just go into the groups too, where this is sort of like a cyber little pat on the hand going, yeah, I know. We've been there too. You're going to get through this. Yeah.
And for the whole team that's involved in it too, is for the caregivers, for the stroke survivor. And, Bill, I think what you're doing is fantastic and you have such a gift. And I'm going to say something that might be a little bit out there, but even if somebody hasn't had a stroke, if you listen to this, you're going to get something out of it. Do you know what I mean? You don't even have to be a stroke survivor, a caregiver, or whatever, because what we've discussed is deep and it touches on so many emotional levels. So I think that is, I think it's tremendous. And you make it so easy,
Yeah.
Well, we learned a lot of lessons through our strokes that hopefully we can share so that other folks can learn them without having to go ahead and stop up their brain for a little while.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that are out of our control after our stroke, but our emotional state doesn't have to be one of them. There are techniques we can use to manage our emotions. And if our mood keeps getting away from us, professionals can help us learn appropriate tools or prescribe medications to help with the worst of it. The point is, we have options and we have choices, and our doctors can help. And that brings us to our hack of the week. I typically type 30 words per minute these days with just one hand. One reason I can do this is because I have sticky keys enabled on my Windows computer. With sticky keys, I don't have to hold down the Shift key or the Control key while I press another key on the keyboard. I can just tap them. It's a great Windows accessibility feature that really helps me get up to speed without having to just have caps locked down all the time. I talk about this feature in more detail and show how you can turn it on in a YouTube video tutorial that you can see at strokecast.com/stickykeys. So check it out, let me know what you think, and let me know how Sticky Keys changes your one-handed typing speed. So what are your strategies for dealing with emotions? Head on over to strokecast.com/Peter2 and let us know in the comments. You can also visit strokecast.com/Peter to read Peter's latest article about post-stroke emotional control or listen to my previous conversation with Peter and Ria. Subscribe to Strokecast for free in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.